My name is Lilia McEnany, and I am an assistant curator at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture, Laboratory of Anthropology. And as you all know, we are here this evening to chat with Dr. Hadley Jensen and Rapheal Begay. So to begin, I'd like to briefly acknowledge the place where this conversation is happening, even though we are in a virtual space and not physically at the museum today, in Okopoge within the Tewa world. As a non-native person living in so-called Santa Fe, I am a guest in the ancestral homelands of the Tewa people. And I wish to acknowledge all of the indigenous people and communities, Pueblo, Diné, Apache, and so many others, past, present, and future, who walk on these lands and steward this place. And I'd encourage everybody in the audience today to think about the spaces and places on which you reside. So as always, a recording of this program will be made available on our YouTube channel in the coming weeks. So keep an eye out on our Facebook page and sign up for our monthly newsletter for that link and future announcements about other upcoming programs. We're intending this program to kind of be a first conversation with Hadley and Rapheal, so stay tuned for future announcements. We're going to be having a Q&A towards the end, last 10 or 15 minutes or so. So for this virtual event, Diné photographer and curator Rapheal Begay and Bard Graduate Center American Museum of Natural History postdoctoral fellow Dr. Hadley Jensen will discuss their work on land-based and relational practices of Navajo weaving. This event ties into MIAC's upcoming exhibition, of which Hadley and Rapheal are co-curators, opening at MIAC in summer of 2023, and we're so excited to be able to make that announcement here tonight. So with support from New York University's Gallatin WetLab, Begay and Jensen worked on a collaborative field documentation project that examines relationships between people and place. Through 360-degree panoramic images, still photographs, and audio recordings, they aim to provide an immersive and sensory experience of the animate landscapes and geographic dynamics of the Navajo Nation. This amazing content will be featured within MIAC's 2023 exhibit in an effort to reimagine and rechart Diné space, particularly within the context of institutional histories and collecting practices. So in building upon the exhibition's themes and narratives, this project also foregrounds reciprocity efforts, making this documentation accessible and relevant to descendant communities whose past, present, and future homelands we inhabit. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Hadley and Rapheal.
Thank you, Lilia. And good evening to all of you. Thank you for joining us. It's such an honor to have this opportunity to share some of our very recent work with you. And I'm just going to share my screen here. It's a privilege and a joy to be a conversation partner with Rapheal Begay for this event, who has shaped this project in many vital ways, and whose work continues to inspire me to think in new directions. We'll take turns sharing content during our presentation, which is energized by questions around curatorial and artistic practice, how exhibition making can respond to new digital platforms, and ideas of collaboration, accessibility, and reciprocity. Our aim is really to invite you all into this process. So with our remaining time, we look forward to receiving your questions. Just to provide some context, this project began as a kind of curatorial dream about a year ago. With support from my colleagues at Bard Graduate Center, an amazing project team, and funding from NYU Gallatin WetLab, we've recently returned from our first location-based shoot on the Navajo Nation. And I wanted to acknowledge at the outset the many collaborators from New York to New Mexico and across several institutions who have helped to bring this project to life. And a shout out to Jesse Morandi and Byron Flesher for their invaluable contributions to the 360 project in particular. So in thinking about how to add dimension, texture, and cultural context to the items displayed in an exhibit on Navajo weaving, this field documentation project responds to the idea that digital tools can help us to ask new questions, track and trace relationships among objects and makers, and describe relationships between people and place. By creating a guided journey for the website or exhibit visitor, we hope that this will provide an immersive and sensory experience of the animate landscapes and geographic dynamics of the Navajo Nation. As this project, tentatively titled Horizons, took shape at MIAC, Rapheal and I began to have conversations about land, space, and light, specifically the horizon. The horizon line is both a point of connection between sky and earth and a delineation or separation of space. We became interested in creating connections between weaving and photography as modes of engagement with place in the American Southwest and the area known as Diné. Building upon current research and fieldwork on the Navajo Nation, this component of our exhibition brings land and landscape into relief as an object or site of inquiry, both historically and into the present. Using panoramic imaging, still photographs, and audio field recordings, we invite viewers to experience the Navajo Nation from a different vantage point, providing on-the-ground visualizations of the varied topographies that animate and activate the process of Navajo weaving, as both an art form and a cultural practice. Through a variety of media, including photographs, textiles, and digital prints, we strive to reimagine and rechart Diné space, particularly within the context of institutional histories and collecting practices. As N. Scott Momaday has observed, men and women learn to appropriate their landscapes, to think and act with them, as well as about and upon them, and to weave them with spoken words into the very foundations of social life. The ethnographic challenge is to fathom what it is that a particular landscape, filled to brimming with past and present significance, can be called upon to say, and what through the saying it can be called upon to do. And that was a quote from Keith Basso's book, Wisdom Sits in Places, Landscape and Language Among the Western Apache. And before I turn it over to Rapheal, just a quick note about the title of the event tonight. The map-territory relation describes the relationship between an object and a representation of that object, as in the relation between a geographical territory and a map of it. The Map is Not the Territory was also a 2019 exhibition at the Portland Art Museum, featuring regional artists exploring place and boundaries and seeking to reimagine the Northwest. By invoking this title, I invite us to consider these connections to land and landscape in the Southwest, centering Indigenous aesthetics and cultural values in dialogue with the land-based and relational practices of Navajo weaving. I hope it provides a point of entry to think about what it means to make art in and to inhabit this region today, but also how to have accountability for a place even when you're far from it. So with that in mind, I will pass it over to Rapheal.
Thank you very much, Hadley. And before we begin, I will also share my screen. Okay, She'e Rapheal Begay Yenishya, Hanaati Nishle, Kitlichini Bashishchin, Taban Dashache, Ashin Dashanele, Sinishchi E Chishake, Ado Seahot Zanenasha. Hello, everyone. My name is Rapheal Begay. I am born for one who walks around. My father's clan is the Red House clan. My mother's is my maternal grandfather's is Water Edge, and my paternal grandparents are Salt. I'm originally from Hunters Point, Arizona, which is about maybe 10 or so minutes south of Render Rock, the capital of the Navajo Nation. I'd like to begin my presentation with this reference to home. Home for me is a place between red dirt and blue skies. And as referenced earlier by Hadley, there is this connection, sense of belonging found within the horizon that connect these 2 points of what I consider my home. And aligned by the sun and connected by the horizon lines, as it were, within these two photographs. The image here on the left is of Hunters Point, Arizona, where again, I was raised, surrounded by my family, the sage and the strata of red rock. To the right is the Render Rock monument pictured here, taken on a film camera. Both of these images were taken during last year at the height of the pandemic. As I was considering place as a sense of belonging, a sense of healing, and a space for reflection at a time when there was so much chaos, uncertainty within the pandemic. But in relationship to the red dirt and blue skies is the light. Within that light is our history, our thoughts, our plans, our livelihoods, and our strength. And growing up within these two locations, I was surrounded by beauty and this inherent sense of memory found within these places. And therefore, I am my surroundings. In 2017, I ventured out to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I obtained my BFA in art studio and in photography, and returned home. And within that, developed and expanded on my series of vernacular response, the ongoing photographic documentation of the Navajo Nation, or Res Life. Within that, I've developed a theoretical framework to approach and navigate the world, but now find myself wanting to communicate those ideas, such as visual blessings, indigenous aesthetics, the significance and role of oral storytelling within cultural traditions, and this sense of stewardship born from the land and of our people and history that is inherently found within the work that I hope to communicate today. The photograph here on the right is an image from the AVR series entitled Internal, taken in 2017 in Fort Defiance, Arizona. It is an image of sheepskin sunbathing, and it's just a beautiful abstract image. Moving forward, upon returning home, I worked for the Navajo Nation government within the Division of Human Resources and Public Information Officer. Within my role, I've been able to embrace these notions of tribal governance and bureaucracy, sovereignty, and the use of Diné fundamental law being incorporated into everything that we do, how we operate with respect to our surroundings, and the legacy that we hope to carry on. With respect to Mother Earth and Father Sky, you can see this connection found within the rainbow above the Navajo Nation flag. And again, we are the light in the center. And when one references Navajo Nation, one thinks of the people or a particular place. And for Navajo, it is Diné. Here is an image of the Navajo Nation looking from a map. Each of these color-coded parts of the map represent different agencies developed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, in which the current government operates. The green being Fort Defiance Agency, pink being Central Agency, the yellow being the Western Agency, the blue being the Northern Agency, and this light copper tone being the Eastern. It is with respect to our orientation within the world and within the Diné that we wanted to operate and move about the land with respect to a clockwise direction. Here in this particular slide, you can see how our journey unfolded. We began in Render Rock, the capital of the Navajo Nation, as figured in the pink outline there, moving into the green, purple, orange, and yellow as far as our trip and itinerary. Definitely not the entire Navajo Nation, but a good amount of it, and definitely a lot of miles put in on our end. To begin our first part of this journey, we began in Render Rock, Arizona, at the tribal monument, Sayahuatzane. Within this location, overlooking this rock formation is the three-branch government, in the center being the executive, to the left being the judicial, and to the right being the legislative branches. The Render Rock is commonly seen at the base looking north, and is a reminder of its own stronghold and sense of community. But this was an opportunity for us to approach these sites, sacred sites, from a new vantage point, to really explore the intimate relationships found within these particular places. This being my home point within the reservation, it resonates with me personally. So this image here is actually looking over into the actual window here, or tetso, which is window in Navajo. Looking above within this window is this bridge overlooking the Rinder Rock. And it's quite a magical experience to be beneath this particular vantage point, a reminder of the majestic nature found within a rainbow or a bridge. And here I'll play a video just to give you an idea of how tranquil this experience really was. Within the background here, you can hear the sounds of the cameras we were using, as well as any other sounds, just because of the echo upon the rock formation walls as pictured here. And something really beautiful about this rock formation was the movement of time and space as the sun moved throughout our time there, and the shadow crossing different parts of this own rock formation, creating different vantage points in the process of while reflecting on what we were actually seeing. From that, we moved to Hunters Point, Arizona, where again, I'm originally from, where my umbilical cord is buried in the sheep corral. Within our culture, to bury one's umbilical cord within a particular site is where one will return. So within this particular place, it is my source of inspiration, of belonging home, and with these traditional values that stem from this location, I hope to incorporate that within my outlook, my perspective, but also within the photographic work that's pictured here today. Here on the left is a field of sage. And at the time prior to this, my family and I ventured back to this particular location to gather sage at a particular time at the beginning of October, which is known as the Hanjit, or the separation of seasons. It's a time to plan for new beginnings, but also a time for seasonal harvesting of crops and dye plants. Moving south from Hunters Point, Arizona, we find ourselves in Oak Springs, Arizona. And as we're driving in separate vehicles, we decide to stop on by this rock formation roadside, which I've always wanted to stop at. And so we took a chance and ventured into this area and found these beautiful rock formations. But in addition to that, while we were there, we came across some dye plants themselves, the hollyberries, pictured here on the right. And I just recall the experience of actually coming across this with Hadley and Jesse, and just seeing the vibrant colors squirt out of these little berries was phenomenal. And to know that Oak Springs and Pine Springs is a place where many Navajo dye plants are sourced, it is also the origin of the Navajo dye chart within the Navajo Nation. And then approaching back to the notion of horizon and this connection to place, we find ourselves looking throughout this landscape and being bound by these two planes of sight and existence. Again, Mother Earth and Father Sky. But again, traveling through light and on the horizon, we find ourselves the following day in Canyon de Chelly in Shinle, Arizona, or in this case, Sayit, which is the rock walls here. So we ventured into the tunnel overlook here at the first part of Canyon de Chelly. And again, the beautiful color of the red rock and blue sky tends to complement one another, but also allow for a visual contrast that is really stunning. Within this area, I take notice of the vegetation and plants growing in a rock and a hard place, so to speak. But this connection and this coexistence being visually represented while we're venturing throughout this little piece of the canyon. Again, it is pretty extensive, but we had the opportunity to venture down and to be able to hide behind the canyon walls, or at least navigate ourselves within it. The rising sun would be peeking over the canyon walls. And within this, as we were returning back up, I saw this shrub just glistening, and I thought it was a beautiful image to share, but also to remind us of the diverse ecological and different types of vegetation that is occurring after each step throughout this varied landscape. But the main reason that we decided to approach Canyon de Chelly and document this space was not only the expansive canyon itself, but with Spider Rock. pictured here in the center part of this image within the canyon. Spider Rock Overlook is the last part of the actual canyon on the south rim. It is also the location and home of Spider Woman. Within Diné creation stories, it is told that she is the one who taught us, the Diné Navajo people, how to weave. There are stories of how the hero twins scaled this particular rock formation, and at the top met with Spider Woman, who showed them the different styles and techniques and uses of Navajo weaving. But we will go ahead and share some images later on in the presentation as to how extensive and expansive this view really is. But while we were there, I was able to notice the distance and difference as was existing throughout the canyon walls. And with these different planes of sight and the relationship between color, texture, space, and this overall aura of significance that existed throughout our trip there. Here on the left is a detail of Spider Rock. Again, the slight space between the two rock formations. And to the right, looking east into the actual canyon, are different vantage points of the canyon walls leading into what you could see there at the canyon floor, covered in trees, red rock, and water markings. And as we ventured forward, this is in Monument Valley on our third day, approaching this particular site, one of the most photographed sites in the world, in fact. I might say this a little bit wrong, but Sepi Nidsky, that's a little bit harder, but the Valley of the Rocks. What is commonly referred to and known as are the three buttes. When you think of Monument Valley, and primarily when you think of the Navajo Nation, you think of these particular tourist visualizations of land, of rock, of the sky, of the Wild West, as seen in movies and things of the sort. But this was an opportunity for us to venture into the actual park, find a different vantage point, and really reflect and embrace our surroundings in this way. This 360 camera that we utilize has 6 lenses and is spherical in shape, as you can see there, sort of similar to something you would find in Star Wars, taken at the base of Rain God Mesa. Moving forward, the photograph here on the left is of yucca, which was used to clean and maintain our hair, and is particularly used in ceremony at some times. But in the background there are the Three Sisters Monument. And throughout their actual tribal park are different overlooks and vantage points that offer a different story. To the right here is just east of Spearhead Mesa, I believe. And something really beautiful, again, similar to found in Canyon de Chelly, is this balance, this extension into the horizon, this complement of red and blue, and then scattered green brush. Something really beautiful and harmonious found not only within the landscape itself, but trying to represent that with the image was an interesting challenge and opportunity. But it all wasn't just red rock. As we ventured further into the park and got to Navajo Code Talkers Outpost, we come across this extensive landscape. And before we get out of our vehicles, there's a eagle above us circle. I take it as a positive omen of being in the right place at the right time. Again, referencing my work of visual blessings. And in this moment, reflecting and appreciating what is before us. And to the right is an image of that landscape there, in detail, where this green shrubbery has this beautiful pattern of placement within the land that tends to vibrate, and one can sense the heat and the sun just from looking at this image, that I thought was really important to reference within our time at Monument Valley. And this photograph here is the North Window Overlook. And one can get a sense of the different planes of the fore, middle, and background, all activated and moving as one, the different colors and textures belonging to one another, this sense of fragility and time passing by, and this immemorial sense of being existing within the monuments. From that, we ventured to our last site out of the four, which is Shiprock, which is Sepetai, or the rock with wings, as pictured here, looking south at Shiprock. The Shiprock Pinnacle is a volcanic neck composed of igneous rock that solidified in the conduit of a volcano. And in its own way, similar to Rinderrock in the way that I view it, the local community views this as its own stronghold, this sense of power and majestic beauty within the horizon. And from each vantage point, looking at the Shiprock is beautiful, is powerful. As you get off the road and venture towards the pinnacle are the wings of the rock, as it were. These beautiful rock formations as an extension of the land, but also as an extension of the volcanic past, this prehistoric past that existed before us, and the relationship and respect that is found within this location. And here, this magnificent photo is at the base of the actual pinnacle. And it is where we come to a close these different locations throughout the Navajo Nation with our goal of expanding this sense of different landscapes, varied agriculture and vegetation, and different forms of seeing, perspective, and being that is found within the Nebekea. And as we were venturing out, we decided to go over Buffalo Pass, where throughout our trip, we've heard stories of this mountain range, both of the Cheska Mountains that offers many dye plants, medicinal plants, ways of seeing, believing, and existing that is in relationship to the land, the discipline, and the cultural teachings that allow one to exist and flourish within this space. But it is also a reminder of, again, us being aligned by the horizon and the light that allows us to see one another, and in this way share photographs with you all today. And with that in mind, I just want to say thank you and welcome, and I'll go ahead and pass the time and the baton to Hadley.
Thank you, Raphael. With the time remaining, I want to take you on a deeper dive into our trip by highlighting just a few of the people we connected with along the way before we open it up to Q&A. So the first is Arnold Clifford, a Diné scholar, field botanist, ethnobotanist, and geologist, whom we happened to meet one afternoon at Tisnaspas Trading Post. From Baclabado, New Mexico, and the Carrizo Mountain Range, about 50 miles west of Farmington, Clifford integrates his cultural teachings with his scientific work and his mission to, quote, document life. As an associate editor for the Bolac San Juan Basin Flora Project, Clifford's expertise is in flora of Navajo Nation and the Four Corners region. He's one of the authors of Flora of the Four Corners region, Vascular Plants of the San Juan River Drainage, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah. And you can't quite tell from this picture, but it's a massive 1,000-page dictionary with over 2,000 plant specimens. Clifford, who's now 55, we think, learned much of what he knows about Navajo ethnobotany and traditional ecological knowledge from his grandmother, Sarah Charlie. Beginning when he was 9, she taught him about edible plants, plants used to make dyes, medicinal plants, ceremonial plants, plants that provide protection, and those used in warfare. In 1989, he decided to study botany at San Juan College in Farmington, where his interest in collecting plants was further fostered. He told his then botany professor, Kenneth Hale, that he would catalog all the plants in the Carrizo Mountains within a summer. It's been over 30 years and I still haven't completed the whole thing, he says. With a bachelor's degree in geology, he has a deep localized knowledge of place, but he notes that his Navajo cultural understanding is his most important tool. I'm thinking about these plants as holy plant people and being reverent about my science. When you think of them that way, they reveal themselves to you. Clifford's herbarium and storage area in Baclabado is in an abandoned house with no electricity. As we followed him from the Tisnos Post trading post in our rental car, we drove off the highway and down a winding dirt road with a backdrop of the Carrizo Mountains. As he led us through the dimly lit entrance, it opened up to reveal several piles of papers, as well as books, plant pressings, and the plastic chair on which he sits to do this work. Stored in towering aisles of 100-year-old filing cabinets, labeled Gray Herbarium, Harvard University, in typewritten letters, it contains over 24,000 plant species from the Four Corners area of the Colorado Plateau, and in particular, the Navajo Nation. Clifford has documented more than 2,000 plant species on the Navajo Nation alone. And then there's the rock library and the fossils, like that piece of a triceratops leg bone that he excitedly pulled out to show us. Diné's science and that of other tribes is never acknowledged in schools and universities, he says, yet it tells us so much about the world. You won't find it in texts. It lives and breathes in storytelling and in ceremonies. We have stories about every bit of it, Clifford says, about the earth, plants, people, animals, and skies. Very extensive stories. They're not just little tales. Land is also central to Clifford's work, and as he says, it is directly related to the land as our ancestors, and integral to the teachings and stories of Native peoples. In a 2019 article in the Navajo Times, Clifford noted that science is embedded in our stories, even our language, pointing out that the Navajo words for different kinds of rock give hints to how they were formed. My ecology, my foundation comes from my elders, he said. There's a lot more we could say about our time with Arnold, but I also want to briefly mention the work of Kevin Aspis, a Diné weaver who's based in Shiprock, New Mexico. An integral part of his work involves the thoughtful and intentional use of materials, including natural dyes and Navajo churro wool. And on the left here is some indigo yarn that he dyed, and his weaving comb, which was made by Artie Aragon. He invited us into his home and studio while we were there to see what he was working on. And we somehow ended up in his sheep corral later that evening and stayed until it got dark. Kevin has also been deeply committed to supporting and advancing the work of Sheep is Life. Diné Beina is a nonprofit organization. It means the way that we, the people, live, that promotes a sustainable livelihood through the Navajo way of life. Traditionally, this has been sheep, wool, and weaving, and whatever comes from that. Their mission is to, quote, restore the balance between Navajo culture, life, and land. We seek to preserve, protect, and promote the Navajo way of life, to encourage the participation and cooperation of the Navajo people among themselves and with other people and organizations, and to engage in research, education, development, establishment, and promotion of projects and activities which further these ends. And finally, I just wanted to note future directions for this work. And we're still very early on in this process. We just came back from this trip on October 10th, so just over a month ago. But Darby Raymond Overstreet is a digital artist and printmaker based in Chimayo, New Mexico, and we've been working together for the last couple years. So she'll be creating digital prints based on Raphael's photographs that combine landscapes with patterns and designs used in Navajo weavings from MIAC's own collection. And this was a digital print on the right here that she did in 2018. And it just struck me how closely these images are related. So with the time we have left before we switch over to Q&A, I wanted to give you a quick sample of 2 of the audio recordings that I did during our trip, and then Raphael will demo the 360 content that we created. And we're still trying to figure out how to integrate this media content into the context of a digital exhibition on Navajo weaving, but also into the gallery space at MIAC. And we welcome your suggestions and would love to have a conversation when we finish up. So this was an audio recording of our footsteps in Canyon de Chelly.
Zoom 9, Canyon de Chelly. Zoom 9, Canyon de Chelly.
That gives you a sense of it. And I'll play one more. This was Raphael's Echo in Monument Valley. So we're thinking that maybe you would be able to hear this sound as you walk into the gallery space or in a media room. We're still working through it. But this is a photo of our 360 camera at the Spider Rock Overlook, and it has 6 lenses. So it's capturing images from all sides and from above and below that are then stitched together to create the views that Raphael is about to show you.
Thank you for that, Hadley. And just one moment as I share my screen as well. And so again, this here is one of 3 featured images from the 360 camera. And so as you can see, Hadley here, and then Byron in the shadow of the actual camera within Tunnel Overlook of Canyon de Chelly, one of our first stops while we were in Chinle. And as mentioned before, it allows us to navigate and be immersed in this beautiful capturing of the sun just glistening over the canyon walls as the camera sits in the shadow. And then even above, as below, oh, there's myself speaking to some fellow Diné relatives who were also on the trailhead that particular morning. But similar to this, you can see how the photographs that I was able to document would support the actual exhibition and the 360 imaging pictured here. Taking a step a little bit further into Tunnel Overlook, you can see the actual ground of the actual Canyon de Chelly. And again, this vantage point taken earlier in the still photograph shared earlier and just the varied landscape and vegetation found within the canyon walls and along the trail featured here. And again, of the three, this is Spider Overlook. And as Hadley shown earlier, the camera itself is just at the edge. And you were able to peer down into the canyon floor and see the water moving through it, as well as Spider Rock and the different shadows and the lights moving throughout the canyon walls, and supported by the beautiful sky with the clouds. And again, similar to the past images, you can see how we're able to move in a 360 motion this particular spot. And then here, looking to the west, there's some tourists at the same overlook that we are at. And so imagining the use of this type of imagery, I have myself have never seen 360 imagery of the Navajo Nation, let alone these particular sacred sites, and how to incorporate this immersive technology and sense of being and relationship that is found within Navajo weaving and relational aesthetics is our goal with this exhibition and with this particular trip. Thank you so much.
And we'll just conclude with one final audio clip. I'll share my screen again. So this was on our final day of shooting. This was our Shiprock campsite. You can see Byron there at his tent. But we were camping on Raphael's friend's farm. And on the final morning when we were shooting at Shiprock Pinnacle, I recorded this clip of Raphael speaking about the trip, and I'll just play it and then we'll conclude.
Zoom 33, Shiprock Pinnacle, and I'm at the base with Rapheal Begay.
So I think something really beautiful about this trip has been traveling to these different locations within the agencies on Navajo Nation. One in particular being Shiprock, where we're currently at. And the beauty and the magnificent nature of just the site of the pinnacle alone is powerful. And I believe there's a energy that radiates from this particular point within the land that is embodied by the people, the community, the sense of a stronghold and the inherent resiliency found with living on the land, living around this particular point. And each time you walk outside, any different vantage point, whether that's in the east, south, west, or north, you can see the pinnacle. And I believe it to be a reminder of that each day. And we have an opportunity now to experience this rock formation, this part of history, this aspect of Navajo life. And as we ventured throughout the reservation and on our way into Shiprock, each time we saw it had a new appearance. It offers something different. And as we stand here, the open range, some rock formations surrounding us, it's a reminder of our relationship to one another, the respect one needs when traveling about the land and being able to view vegetation, hear the different sounds of the birds that may fly through, but also this calm, serene energy that you can feel, that you can sense. It feels motherly in a sense, as if there's a caretaker just behind your back. And I just would like to share that this community in Shiprock has tends to preserve the traditional aspects of Navajo life. And throughout this trip, we've had opportunities to hear more and more of these stories and feel more and more of these emotions and history pass through individuals who respect it and hold on to it. And in the same way, and with similar intent, we are here to offer that experience and extend it to those willing to receive it with prayer, blessing, and positive energy and understanding. I hope that would allow us a direction forward with respect to where we've come from and where we will be for the rest of our lives in Diné.
So thank you all for listening, and I'm excited to hear your questions.
That was fantastic. Thank you both for such a wonderful presentation. One of the things that I love most about this project is the way that it is so incredibly interdisciplinary, bridging visual anthropology, museum anthropology, ethnobotany, and so much else into one really wonderfully multivocal conversation about Navajo weaving and visual culture. So to kind of start that conversation, Raphael, one thing you said really early on really struck me, and I was thinking about throughout the rest of the presentation. And I was wondering if you would be able to expand on your concept of visual blessings to the extent that you feel comfortable, and kind of how you feel that permeates the rest of your work.
Sure, thank you for the question. And really, I reference my clan in this way, one who walks around literally with my camera, and I'm not seeking to document a particular idea or moment. I am actually responding to my own existence and relationship to my surroundings, which is the Navajo Nation. And with that respect and with that awareness, I'm able to venture out into these locations, and similar to what Arnold had mentioned, with that respect and with that awareness comes not necessarily exposure, but this revealed sense of beauty, a balance of hajon, similar to an experience when one views a weaving or in the process of actually weaving. But personally for me, when I'm on the land and responding, as it were, things do come up. And sometimes these images are created and sometimes they're meant just for you as an individual. And in this moment, and for those in the audience, we are curating our own experience. We are responding in our own way. We are acting in this particular way. And I would just say that the land and our surroundings do the exact thing. They have their own energy. They have their own history, their stories, how they relate to one another with respect to ecology. And I'm just one person who's trying to make that connection and communicate it so that others could benefit and be able to see from that perspective.
Wonderful, thank you for that. And I love the way you said reveal sense of balance and beauty, which kind of leads into my next question. Earlier on in the presentation, Raphael, you showed a video of you squishing the holly berries, which I thought was just fantastic, and thinking about ethnobotany. And I think there's this really hegemonic colonial view of these landscapes being absent and barren and lifeless. And one of the most generative parts of this project, from my perspective, is really undoing that stereotype, and by focusing specifically on plants and dyes to make the landscape appear the way it is, which is very human and very generative and dynamic. So in that, you did mention dye charts. I'm not sure which one of you mentioned them very briefly, but for those in the audience who maybe don't know what dye charts are or the history of them, Hadley, would you be able to speak to that briefly?
Happily. Anyone who knows my work knows that I've become kind of obsessed with dye charts and unraveling the history behind them. And the dye chart itself has actually become the kind of conceptual framework for thinking through the digital exhibition that I've been working on. And will also be the actual interface for the website itself. So die charts basically visualize all of the components of Navajo weaving in miniature. Raphael, I don't know if you happen to have that picture you showed before, but
Yeah, I'll pull it up.
it's sort of like the cultural ecosystem of Navajo weaving within the framed borders of this die chart. So there's a textile in progress on the loom, and then dried dye plants surrounding it, and then yarn that actually connects to the corresponding dye plant. Hopefully we can show you what we're talking about, but they were first created by Mabel Burnside Myers, who is a Navajo weaver and a teacher who lived in the community of Oak Springs and Pine Springs, Arizona. And she first started creating these in the 1950s as these kind of didactic tools for her own weaving students, just to learn about natural dye sources. And then they actually became more popular than her rugs. So she started selling them, and now they've become widely reproduced and circulated throughout the Southwest. I think this is one from Tisnaspas Trading Post. So that's one place you can still find them. There are a few people who are making them. Mabel Burnside Myers' daughter is one of them, and she is also based in Oak Springs. But if you're interested, you can learn much more when this digital exhibit launches in March of 2022.
Fantastic, thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat right now. This is kind of a little bit of a different question, but I'm curious, what was the most surprising part of this trip for both of you?
Yeah, I think, so we all live in our lives, technology, capitalism, what have you. And to go out into the land on this trip was just to exist. And as simple as that may be a concept, it is so powerful to just exist within the land where time is bound by the sun as opposed to a clock, where place is endless and you are this vehicle that allows yourself to be in several places. And when I came back from this trip, the reality of my life came crashing through the door. And I realized the beauty and freedom and found within that existence out on the land. But on a more realistic level, I forget, or tend to forget, how extensive that land is and how long it takes to move about the Navajo Nation. And that is my job, right, within the government. But to take a creative approach through this lens of stewardship and acceptance was truly its own blessing, not necessarily bound visually, but holistically.
There were a lot of surprising aspects of this trip. It's hard to choose just one, but you know, I think this project is really about being immersed, or at least that's what we're trying to create for the site visitor or the gallery visitor. But in a way, it's also about being immersed relationally with us. And I recognize that, you know, in creating and presenting this content, it's not an unmediated view of these places and landscapes. And so I think I just learned so much along the way in working with Raphael and with Jesse and Byron. And I wasn't so much surprised by that. I knew that it would be a learning experience for all of us. But I think we really discovered things along the way, and it was such an experiment because from what I know, no one has done this before in this context. And we received this funding to make it possible, but we have no idea what we would be able to create. We didn't know what the weather would be like. We had never used this camera before, and there were some challenges with that and with the technology itself, which requires that you use your cell phone to activate the actual shutter, or to actually begin capturing images. And of course, you have to hide from the camera when it's shooting. So sometimes we would end up hiding behind rocks and on the ground. And that was something that I did not anticipate. But it was really a gift to have that opportunity. And as I said, we're kind of early on in this process and still trying to figure out what to do with this content and how to make it relevant and accessible beyond just the context of this exhibition. So there's much more to come.
Wonderful. I think that's a wonderful place to wrap up for the evening. Oh, wait, we have one question that just came in. So we have a few moments left, so I think we can take this question if that's okay with you all. This is from Betsy Hawley saying, thank you for this presentation. Can you speak further about some of the challenges in proceeding from a virtual exhibition to an in-person one at MIAC? What will remain central and what will be different? I'm going to preface this by saying that's a huge question that we are grappling with. And thank you so much for asking. It's something that we're all thinking about every day. And I'll let Hadley and Rapheal go from there.
Well, I know Betsy, and I appreciate the question. You know, it's been a really interesting curatorial challenge to figure out how to transition into digital space and really create a compelling experience for someone to view textiles, which in my opinion should really be seen in person. And so it's been a question of what gets lost in digital space, but also what is gained. And I think COVID has challenged all of us, or invited all of us, to think in new ways about those possibilities. And so I think having a digital exhibition that has a much wider reach and something that's also much more accessible allowed us to integrate all kinds of things that we wouldn't have been able to do in a gallery space. And we're planning to have interviews and audio clips and videos and things that really create a more full understanding of the context in which Navajo weaving happens, and the diversity of those practices. And yet, I think there is nothing that can replace the experience of walking through space and encountering these weavings. We're also going to be showcasing a selection of Raphael's photographs alongside the textiles and the prints that Darby is creating as well.
And I would like to also say that this is going to be the first conversation that we're having about this exhibition through MIAC's programming. And I think everybody should look forward to hearing more specifically about that question and about how this exhibition at MIAC is coming to fruition in conjunction with all of Hadley's projects and Raphael's projects. And it's all extraordinarily exciting. And we're very privileged to be able to work with the both of you on the development of this show. So with that, I think we are ready to wrap up, unless there's anything else that either one of you would like to chat with MIAC audiences about.
I'll keep that for the next talk, but yeah, to everyone, and thank you for joining. We look forward to creating this with you in mind and with you in spirit.
Thank you all.
All right, have a good night, everybody.